Welcome to the TLGS 2022 conference. My name is Corinne Bishop from the University of Central Florida. I'll be collecting questions in the chat for this session, which is called, I have not been in school for over 10 years. Can you help me? Understanding and developing information literacy skills for non-traditional graduate students. Thank you, Amy.
Thank you so much. I appreciate the time. This is my first slide right here with our information. And so the next one, this is my contact information, should you need that at the end of the session. Like I said, my name is Amy Dye-Reeves, and I am the Education and History Liaison at Texas Tech University in Lubbock, Texas. And this is my email address if you have any questions. So this is the agenda for today. I'm going to start by introducing and defining non-traditional students. Also looking at my pre-assessment data, meeting them where they are, skills needed to help those new students starting from the ground level in a doctoral graduate program. Also creating community and implementing asynchronous instruction effectively, and also post-assessment data, what's next, and any questions you might would have. So we're going to start with an introduction. What are non-traditional graduate students? So from the National Center for Education Statistics, they really characterize non-traditional students that they're non-dependent, financially support, married, single parents, having more than one child, delayed entry into post-secondary education. And the common themes that I have seen has been employment demand, time constraints, financial problems, academic workload, and financial obligations. So I've seen this increase of demand of going back to continue with school to really get a higher degree or more money, life satisfaction. I want to show my kids that I can do this. Also looking at those social economic status, as well as their own aspirations to obtain a higher level for themselves. And so on this particular slide, you'll see where I began with the process, which was the pre-assessment of needs. And I also wanted to target what programs within the College of Education most made sense. We have a large number of our students in our education psychology and leadership program who are non-traditional students. And then I started crafting those particular library programs that we already offer in terms of asynchronous instruction, hybrid instruction, face-to-face instruction, and also thinking which graduate programs would best fit that need, especially within our education and leadership and programs there. Creating video engagement content, asynchronous videos. We're going to talk more about that approach, and a post-assessment, what happened after I started this particular program with our doctoral students, and what's next with the maintenance. So this is my pre-assessment data. So when I was working with my students, and I worked with them at different points. So fall of 2020, spring 2021, and fall of 2021. And so I wanted to see where they were, especially with the non-traditional students, where they started. So a lot of them did not know how to use a library catalog. They didn't know what that meant in some aspects of that. When you mentioned the public library, they kind of had a better idea there. What a database was, that was really unclear for the most part, especially in the beginning stages. And also, conducting those literature reviews. How do I conduct a thorough literature review? Where do I look for data sets? My education students, they really are looking for the quantitative, qualitative, and mixed method study, especially within the databases. And so there was a lot of a misunderstanding of how do I begin this process, and especially if they weren't using computer resources in, say, the past, at least 10 years. And so for a lot of them, this was a lot of stress. A lot of them had their were unsure about using library and library services, what was already being offered out there, and their motivation. What was the motivation behind them enrolling in a graduate program? So that's kind of the factors that I looked at, but I also spent some time focusing the importance of learning. What was some of the common themes that I found, especially in my pre-assessment data? I found a theme of self-understanding, so themselves, learning their own needs and overcoming adversity, whether that would be online learning, would be one of that, or just figuring out study strategies or academic needs. What worked for them 10 years ago may not work for them now. Also, the community was so important, building relationships, improved interaction with a peer group, coping skills, really adopting those strategies and adjusting to obstacles that they would have. And those instructional needs that comes internally, learning about what works for me, and it may not work for others within their particular peer group. Virtual learning and approaches to learning, and just having that overall learning behavior, just using Zoom, having those interactions are very important to them. And I found that community played a huge part of building relationships with them. So I looked at examining Weidman and Twell and Stein. And so when I was looking at this, I looked at a formal and informal and personal and anticipatory. So when I was looking at this, I looked at students who were entering the program, so learning those new roles. And so taking it from there, I saw that within there's different stages. So in these 4 stages, we looked at knowledge acquisitions and investment, involvement, and the nature of identity as well as commitment. So anticipatory, when they're entering the program and learning these new roles, they're learning things through the observation that's already happening, the accuracy of acknowledging a factor because they're often on the outsider status within that first initial framework. The investment is really stating that investment in the role that they're having by applying and enrolling in schools. And sometimes they're also rejecting those alternatives, thinking about the financial, a temporary, a full versus part-time status investment. And the involvement is that admission process, becoming an insider, beginning to think of themselves in a role. So that may shadow of that in a professional field. So the nature of identity and identification is thinking about those conflicting roles, other possible professional roles. And also for the formal, you're really starting to think, okay, I have the primary sources of knowledge to get here. And I'm beginning to acquire some competency and requiring those knowledge and skills. Those expectations of these dimensions begin to become clear. And they begin to understand why the alternative roles and institutions were often being rejected at that particular time. So sorting and selecting of students by faculty. And then we're thinking about, within formal, you're thinking about the investment. So that specialized knowledge, those education policies, looking at social value of consistency, pride and self-esteem all makes things difficult for them. But they're also wanting to include those values, those attitudes, those ethics and beliefs of the profession in which they're trying to get in. And the involvement really plays a huge part of providing opportunity and comparing skills and competency in performing that particular role, but motives for choosing the profession that they're working in with roles that would be incompetent with roles with other students. So the demonstration of that is so important in time on task. So some of that, would be later on, they really want to have a fellowship or an internship, depending on what their graduate program would dictate. But it's important to have that nature of identity and commitment, the identities with the problems and ideology and motives that are required for them to seek this and write their doctoral dissertation really plays a part of that nature of identity as well as commitment. Those informal interactions are so important currently in the role in which they're trying to obtain their doctoral degree. For themselves, it's their own personal roles and social structure, what works for me. And they're trying to find that as they're developing that and going through classes. So one of the topics that I really looked at and investigated in my own research was looking at the community of practice. So basing on the research that I've found in Wagner that shared a concern or a passion for something that they do and learn how to do it better as they've interacted regularly. thinking about the domain, so the value collective, the experience, the learn, competencies, looking at the development with the community of learners, and really the tools that they need to be a part of this process. And this is how I did that with my community of practice that I create. One of the things that I found unique within my user population is that majority of them are online. They start with their doctoral programs online due to COVID-19 as they were starting in person previously to the pandemic. So one of the things that I really wanted to focus on was creating a community of practice all year long. So ours start with our doctoral students in the summer. They start in June. And so we get new students June to June. And also depending on the program is that what I often will do in the summer as well as in the fall is creating open houses. So there's Zoom rooms for students to ask questions. This is a time for them to get to know library services, what I do for a consultation, things that we can offer within the library standpoint. And so later in the term, I often create virtual research parties. And this is centered around a time when they have a lot of papers due. There's a high need for a consultation efforts that's getting closer to, say, their dissertation defense. And we have group rooms. So I'll go from group room to group room and see if they have any questions. Some of them are working on very similar projects. So that's how I group them. And oftentimes I will ask that before I start the session, is there a particular class that you need this for? And then I'll group them that way. And then I follow up throughout the years. They have watch parties with the library instruction videos that they have on Zoom. And so they will watch some of my asynchronous videos, especially if it's finding articles or using a particular database, finding data sets. They will actually have that together. And I'm going to talk about how some of these asynchronous videos and what technologies I use here to come soon. So also when I was designing, I looked at a self-determination theory. So I looked at intrinsic motivation as well as extrinsic motivation and amotivation. So I really like to focus on the human motivation and personality that looks at the personal development and behavior of self-regulation. So looking at intrinsic, really seeking out those challenges and those capacities to learn, but also extrinsically looking at performance of an activity in order to obtain some type of separate outcome there. And amotivation, that psychological effort and effects, why I'm achieving this. So why am I doing this? Why am I being a part of this particular program? How is this going to help me in the long run achieve what I needed to? And I also used the social cognitive theory to construct my asynchronous videos. And so when I did that, the self-development and the renewal was very challenging at times. But looking at some of these design and principles and theory that I was looking at was thinking in terms of self-regulation and the process in learning and performance that was happening in action. So constructing the asynchronous videos and how did they often respond to these set of questions that I had for them. And so the first thing when I was talking with students, they always want to have the correct answer. What is the correct answer for this particular set of, say, you're doing a multiple choice question on locating and finding articles, which database makes sense with this particular research question, and thinking about subject related databases versus general related databases, for example. And do I have the right answer? And so to do that, what I used was looking at Kelly's hybrid flexible course design. So I have the learner's choice, which is that meaningful choice between time and space, but also looking at the equivalency of all the participation modes and models with learning outcomes and assessment pieces, and really reusable those objects that you have in each participation mode. And those technological skills have access to all those different modes with no economic or social restrictions, because we know all these issues can be very hard, especially during the pandemic and now going forward with the digital divide. So looking at the 7 principles in traditional education, I really wanted to have that encourage contact between students and faculty. And I would talk with them through we have a College of Education listserv. So I would talk with them through that, as well as we have the email chain that they would have with several graduate students, setting up individual Zoom rooms to have these conversations, but encourage the active learning aspect, giving them prompt feedback, emphasizing time on tasks and communication of high expectations, and really respecting that there is a lot of different diverse talents and backgrounds and different ways of learning. So one of the technologies that I use, and maybe you also use this as well, is Play Pose It. One thing I love about using Play Pose It, it's embedded in our LMS with Blackboard. And so what I do is I create short videos, so nothing more than 30 minutes with the videos, is because you want them to feel comfortable with locating items, but you don't want to overload them with too much content. So with Play Pose It, what I do is I create my video ahead of time. And so whatever way that you create your video content. And then what I do is I will upload this to Play Pose It. And what I do is I will cut at different points. So maybe 055, I'm going to ask a multiple choice question, or I might ask a short answer. So as they're watching the video in real time, they're seeing people respond to that particular question. I really love short answer because it pops up on the screen for me. So I'm able to get that feedback from them when I check the video, but also when I see them interacting with each other and with the questions, I felt has been really meaningful. Have an example of that that'll be in the slides. If you'd like to see an example of what that looks like in real time, you can. Happy to do that. How I construct my videos is those multiple modules. I want to start with a welcome and a friendly video, how to contact me for any help. Again, no more than 30 minutes. Just don't cram everything into one particular video. I really, with our non-traditional students, they want to have a little bit at a time. So we have a series, and I'll show you what my example of my series looks like. And think about, for you logically, what comes first? What do they need first to be successful? So is the first thing that they need, is that going to be a quick demo of the library interface? Is it the first thing that you would want them to have a video of you and what the services that you offer? But some of the things that I love to highlight, especially, is what a database. I've seen a lot of my non-traditional students not always know what a database is or what that term means, as well as a general versus a subject-related database. And so oftentimes I will demo in videos, Academic Search Complete, and also using Education Source, and then creating a new video for keywords later. So we'll start with developing a research question. And like I tell my students, I always like to pull the meats, the important parts out of that research question and make it workable in the database and workable for them and what makes sense for them. So that is one thing that when you're constructing the video, you want to think about how the experiences that they have, what experience have they had in the past with using resources. I have a partnership within the College of Education. So my videos stay on their graduate student resources on their website. And so I've started in this example that who I am, a brief introduction to myself, some of the resources that we offer, getting in contact with me because I use LibCal a lot for them to schedule 30-minute appointments with me, or an hour if they do both blocks, and what I can exactly do for them. I try to get into most of the classes throughout the year. And sometimes if that's not possible, having these type of video resources really helps throughout that entire process. So my comparison of a time period, during the pre-pandemic, I started with questions that were driven. I half and half were comfortable with using resources. Some of them were not. Learning styles, what worked best for me. Really having that desire for community, finding people who are a lot like me. So when I was designing that, I was thinking about those Zoom rooms. I was thinking about different ways to interact with those students. And during the pandemic, I like to call it Confusion City. We had some students who were just clicking on random things on the website. I had students who were going to Google trying to buy articles because they didn't know how to use the library website. So there's a lot of confusion how to do that. So I really worked on that, on working the partnership within the College of Education, having those video resources and having that sign set up with me and working with faculty. So they were not trying to buy one article for $75 that they found on Google. Learning styles without a professor, they would often come to me and say, I'm not exactly sure. I haven't been to school in a very long time. Can you tell me what different types of learning styles are out there for online learning? So we would have those conversations as well. And the post-pandemic, I feel like right now, if we're going to call it post, I guess, we're still in the pandemic here, but, they're trying to become more comfortable. And I was starting to really see that during the late summer of 2021. We were starting to build more community through the Zoom rooms, the virtual research party. They were feeling less anxious and afraid overall to ask questions. And, on the occasion, you might have had a student who said, well, in my generation, this is how it happened. Measuring those post-assessment data and really thinking about how I saw it from the pre and post, you're starting to see things get a little bit better. And after they've had a consultation or watching an asynchronous video, they started to more understand how to use the library catalog, the conducting those literature reviews, using the databases. And I think for me, the struggle is locating data and metrics. That's still something I have seen my students have difficulty with finding. A lot of them are just not sure where to go, what databases to use. Some still kind of really figuring out the best way to work with that. I do asynchronous videos as well as workshops for them throughout the year. I work with our faculty constantly, trying to develop what workshops would go really well for each semester. Right now, the big emphasis is on journal impact factors as well as publishing. So that is something that the non-traditional students have been very interested in recently. So I'm going to start working on that with our faculty, hopefully this month and coming into May with some more workshops for the college. So my future casting is that I am continuously learning throughout this process on the asynchronous learning as well as hybrid, what works for them, and really encompassing the principles that I looked at, because they're all not going to be the same. I really like to apply more interactive aspects to Play Pose It and allowing students to watch those videos multiple times as well as their own schedule. One of the things that I have really thought about, I'm changing my schedule, and I am working on Saturdays and Sundays to best meet with our non-traditional students as well as our other traditional graduate students. I have seen an influence of just students who really need that Saturday and Sunday consultation. So I'm going to be off 2 days during the week to make sure on Saturday and Sunday they have what they need. And so I know my faculty was really excited when I announced that last week. And so I hope that this helps you all as well with your conversations that you have with working with non-traditional students. And I wanted to save just a little bit of time towards the end if you had any questions for me about working with non-traditional students, and I'm happy to help in any way possible. And thank you all so much for having me. And this is my contact information. Thank you.
Thank you, Amy. We do have some questions. One of the first questions was, how do you advertise your open house events? And have you had good attendance?
So my open house events, one of the things that I do is it's on our university libraries Twitter. We also have that as well on all our social media platforms, but I also work with our College of Education faculty, and they have a communications and marketing program. So I get with them and we create a flyer. And we also have digital flyers throughout the building, and they will also put it on their social media pages. So kind of working with the different communication and marketing throughout. That's what we do, as well as announcing it. We have a kind of a listserv called Tech Announce. And so I try to place that information on there as well for students to locate information. So yeah, thank you so much for the question.
Yes. And there's one more. How many of your students are online only?
So for online only, I will have to say that with our graduate program, we're so, I would say about now it's getting to be about 70%. It is a very high number of students who are online. And that is just because they are constantly starting with these graduate programs that was face-to-face pre-pandemic. we found that the enrollment is actually higher. Now we get more students who are wanting to be online due to, especially with non-traditional students, in terms of wanting to work from home or the weekends and being flexible with that. So we have found that with that particular programs that we have, it's really all the programs now in the College of Education has been majority online. I work with students who live in China and different locations. So I will have to also do the time change. And we have a large cohort of students who are in California. So the time change is very important, especially working with them. And I found Saturdays and Sundays, I think it's going to work really well. And I'm excited to see how that's going to change in April with my current schedule during the week.
Thanks. I really liked your idea about using Play Pause It for interactivity. I think that's a great idea. And let's see if we have any other questions. Do you have graduate programs? Do your graduate programs have any established standards for InfoLit? Do faculty outside the library actively address it? Or do you feel that this is mostly a voluntary issue students are driven to pursue?
So one of the things that I know when I first started my position, I've been here for 3 years now. And so the first thing that I had talked with the College of Education dean, and he started at the same time as me. So I wanted to start with him on, what information literacy skills has been developed previously. And also, if you have any data for, the ADs as well as the information literacy. So one of the things that once I gather the data and the classes, so I target a lot of classes that have to do with, analytical data, a lot of them, having the, anything that for information literacy, a lot of times, some of the professors I've seen, especially in the beginning, really were like, go find it yourself. I was like, hey, we're going to go ahead and we are going to work on this together, a joint project. And so now they know how important it is to start early in the process, because not all of them had access to certain databases they had at their previous institution, or some of them didn't have a whole lot of exposure, especially in their undergraduate research. So you really had just a wide variety of students who might, again, not have done this for about 10 years or so. So I think for me, it was developing and working with them early in the process and identifying what courses works best. And that was going for me through the course descriptions, as well as working with the professors and going through their website initially on what their areas were and what classes they taught. And for me, I also, like when I first started, I would just go over there and talk with them and knock on the door. And I was like, oh, do you have a minute? Hi, I'm Amy. And they would like, oh yeah, like this would be great. So I think even the face-to-face also really helps as well. So I hope that answers your question.
Yes, thank you. Someone isn't familiar with Play Pause It, so they were asking, since it was new to them, how much it was.
I don't know the amount because ours is through our institution. So it's through our LMS and Blackboard. So I'm not sure what LMS that you would use. I know it's embedded in a lot of that. I also believe Canvas has that as well. Mm-hmm. So you might would want to see in the tools and the features if that's available to you. Also just seeing online, if you just go to their website, you also can find some more information there.
Well, thank you so much for a great presentation.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Okay, bye.
Bye.